everybody, and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. For today's video, we're going to be talking about the announcement that has been made that Mount Gox is set to be making a repayment sometime next month. During this news, we are seeing the price of Bitcoin selling off, revisiting the main support of our trend that we've been watching for. In my last update, we were all the way up here, and I explained why I thought we would revisit this support. We have currently retested it, and it's looking like we could be at a major shifting point in the market. We're going to be jumping into Ethereum. We're going to be looking at the Bitcoin dominance because this thing is rejecting, and Ethereum is about to be breaking out against Bitcoin for the first time in over 650 days. This is a huge point in time for crypto. Now we need to get buckled in, be positioned, and be ready to capitalize, because once the fear is at the maximum, that's right when the maximum opportunity of profit comes in, and we need to make sure that we're ready to capitalize on any of the direction ahead. If you find any value in this video, please do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and if you want to see anything I'm investing in long term, links are in the description. Go ahead and sign up on my website. For those that have been wondering where I've been the last week, I've had a lot going on, wasn't able to upload. Expect 5 uploads this week minimum, and maybe even upload extra into the weekend depending on how the week goes. Right off the bat, guys, I needed to start out with this, going into the details around this Mount Gox unlock, because as this announcement has been made, we are seeing the price of Bitcoin selling off, and we are also seeing the price of Ethereum selling off. Bitcoin is selling off more, but we are approaching that main support line that I drew for you guys in my last update. Now, this sell-off is completely taking place because of this FUD that has been announced around the Mount Gox unlocks. There is set to be $9 billion worth of repayment taking place next month. So we're going to be seeing unlocks. Some of these Bitcoin that Mount Gox has been holding for a long time have started to move on chain, and we're looking at some of these investors being accredited back their holdings. Now, right off the bat, guys, we're going to go through, read this article, and I'm going to explain the details, and then we're going to be jumping into a Twitter thread that's going to go through the exact numbers. We're going to look at how much Bitcoin are being unlocked, where is the Bitcoin going, is it all going to be market dumped, and how are the finer details of this going to be playing out? Because I think that it's not such a black and white answer. We need to look into the details, we need to look into the data so that we can be best prepared and positioned. Right off the bat, Mount Gox, once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange, is set to initiate repayments to its creditors after a protracted 10-year wait. The Rehabilitation Trustee announced that Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash distributions will commence July 24th, signaling a potential resolution for thousands of affected users. The trustee stated that the plan will commence the repayments in Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash in due course. Approximately 127,000 creditors are owed over $9.4 billion worth of Bitcoin following the collapse of Mount Gox in 2014. The exchange's downfall was attributed to multiple undetected hacks over several years, resulting in the loss of over 850,000 Bitcoin, worth $52 billion today. In May 2024, Mount Gox transferred 141,000 Bitcoin worth $9.62 billion to a new wallet address. This move, the first on-chain activity from the exchange in over 5 years, was confirmed by a rehabilitation trustee. So we're getting the announcement. We've already seen the money moving on-chain. We're looking at $9.62 billion worth of Bitcoin, today's value in Bitcoin, that is going to be unlocked in July and paid back to some of these trustees. Now, guys, I have a friend that was actually, had over 100 Bitcoin on Mount Gox in the early days of Bitcoin when it got hacked, and he's been getting paid out for the last, I don't know how long, 10 years basically, but realistically the last 5 to 7 he's been paid out. And the last time he got paid out, they were only paying people out based off the value of that Bitcoin at that time, so $450. So his 100 Bitcoin that's worth whatever it is today is, only getting paid out at a $500 clip per Bitcoin. So the thing that we have to understand here is many of these people are never going to be recouping these same amount of losses. Like I stated, the total loss is like $60 billion. So they're never going to be able to recoup that, but they're getting ready to actually unlock what they have. They're going to pay back at least a portion of that. And then through that, they're also going to be paying in Bitcoin Cash as well. So I think that this is going to be a really big move, and it's really why we're seeing such a strong pullback in the shorter time frames of Bitcoin. In my last update, we were all the way up here consolidating, and I said how because we lost 69,000, we were most likely going to be revisiting at the minimum 64,000, and we could have a real potential of us visiting all the way back at the range low. As you guys can tell, 64 did not hold. With this Mount Gox FUD, Bitcoin is pulling back pretty strongly, and we're currently sitting all the way back down at our base support. So the question comes, what are the details of this? How much is it going to impact the price of Bitcoin? I'm going to be jumping into the charts, but first I wanted to talk a little bit about more of the details around these unlocks, because anytime you have a big article that comes out that exclaims that, oh my God, $10 billion is going to be dumped on the market, it's not always so black and white. And we're seeing an overreaction in the market. The market's selling off. We're seeing Bitcoin pulling back pretty massively. And there's a lot of FUD in the market. Now, whenever we see these sort of news events that come out, oftentimes it can mark a shifting point in the market, whether that's a capitulation bottom or whether it's the point before we make a much bigger move one way or other. It could be to the upside or the downside. Because we were kind of sitting in this middle range, and because the news is starting to act as more of a bearish sentiment, I wouldn't be surprised if this market ended up coming and actually finding some type of support back down in here at these range lows. This was something I talked about when we were talking about the Wyckoff accumulation. And the reason why I believe that is because when we're looking into the details of what this unlock really means, it's important that we understand that really it's not like $10 billion is going to be market sold. And when we look at the amount of money that could actually be dumped on that unlock day, it's a lot smaller than the headlines will lead you to believe. And that's why I think it's important that we're understanding the bigger picture. So I'm going to jump into this, and then we're going to be finishing up by explaining what the charts are telling us so that we can be best positioned and prepared regardless of the scenario it takes. This is going to be the total kind of balance sheet, I guess you could say. Now, there was an early payout for people, and they took an 11%, 10 to 11% cut off the top to be paid out early. So those early payments are what's going to be coming into effect, taking place sometime in July. So anybody that actually accepted, the early payment, they had to take 11% cut off the top of what little they were already going to make. So basically, there's some estimations on how much that is, but this guy made a really good thread that I'm going to break through because I think it's important that we're understanding some of the more basics. So when we're looking at the real lost money, there was 940K Bitcoin, $424 million at the time. They recovered 15% or 141,000 Bitcoin total. Now that was 63 million at the time, now worth 9 billion. While the 15% recovery, that was 140x gain for credited investors in terms of USD value. So they at least made back some of the money, only 15 to 20%, but regardless, there was still some of that was actually found and given back. Not a ton, but it was at least something. Now, if we come down in here, to get payout now, the early payout, which was the 11% haircut, you had to take that 10% off the top. He assumes that 75% of the people chose that option. So what that means is about 75% of those tokens will be set to be distributed around this July time. So you're looking at like 95,000 tokens for the early pay. Of that 95,000 coins, 20 of them goes to claims and funds, 10K goes to the Bitcoinica, BK, and then that leaves 65,000 coins for investors. That 65K is split amongst Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, and it's significantly lower than the 141,000 total of the 15% that were actually scavenged, right? Because there was like 850,000 Bitcoin, actually 940,000 Bitcoin that were stolen at the time of that announcement, and they were able to recover 15% of those. So with that 15%, that's what they're going to be distributing from. So when we look down here, the total was 141,000 coins, right? But we're only really going to get 65,000 of those unlocked to the investors that could potentially dump. So it's already a much smaller fraction of the total tokens that are going to be unlocked for people to dump. Not to mention, he makes a really good point. But there are also reasons to believe that the individual creditors will be more diamond-handed than the market expects. One, creditors are significantly skewed toward long-term Bitcoiners. They are tech-savvy early adopters. Anybody using Bitcoin in 2014 was an early adopter, and you're probably just going to keep holding whatever you get back from those. Individual creditors resisted years of compelling and aggressive offers from claimed funds, suggesting they wanted their coins back rather than a USD-denominated payout. 3, capital gains impact of selling would be significant with price appreciation. Even though it's only 15% in-kind recovery, claims holders are up 140x since bankruptcy. That's all going to have to be taxed. So there's a lot of details when we're looking at these. That being said, even if only 10% of the 65 tokens are sold, that's 6,500 BTC to be dumped on the market. And likely in market sales, creditors will receive coins either to accounts at Kraken, Bitstamp, or BitGo, with most individuals having them deposited directly into Kraken or Bitstamp trading accounts. A few thoughts on the claim funds. From speaking with some of them, my understanding is that the vast majority of LPs in these funds are Bitcoiners looking for BTC at a discount, not credit funds doing an arb trade. While it's certainly possible that some LPs will sell, I don't believe these funds are mostly comprised of traders seeking arbitrage. BCH is likely to fare much worse than Bitcoin from the Mount Gox distributions. 1. No creditor originally purchased Bitcoin Cash. The recovered Bitcoin Cash stems from the Gox using its BTC keys to claim the fork. Because remember, Bitcoin Cash was a hard fork. It was an airdrop back in 2017. And so they're basically just claiming all of their free Bitcoin Cash, and they're using that to also go back and pay back investors. But the issue with this, Bitcoin Cash liquidity is very low, 400K liquidity on order books within 1% market price. So the liquidity gets thinner. Obviously, if we look at only Kraken and Bitstamp, where individual creditors are going to receive coins, BTC has 60x the liquidity on these exchanges as BCH. So if you hold BCH, you should expect that this is going to drop a lot harder than the rest, and it's because they're most likely going to be looking to sell their Bitcoin Cash. None of these people really care about Bitcoin Cash because it was a forked token, it was an airdrop, and they weren't holding it before this Mount Gox announcement was made. So this is kind of the last little thing we're going to talk about quickly. So I believe the number of coins being distributed is lower than the market expects. See all types of these headlines, and I think BCH will perform worse on a relative basis than BTC once these coins are distributed. So when we're looking at this, even though the announcements are being made that it's $9 billion worth of repayment, when you're looking at the finer details, it's actually a much smaller amount of those tokens that are going to be unlocked and potentially could be sold on the market. So if you're looking at this, I just think it's important that you're reading this entire thing. I only looked through a little bit, briefly touched up on some stuff. I'm going to link it in the description for anybody else that wants to go over it. You can look at the entirety of the balance sheet. Obviously, these are estimations made by this guy, but they're pretty accurate. So I would check this out. But this is what's giving me confidence that, maybe this sell-off for Bitcoin is going to be a shifting point for the market. In my last update, we were talking about this Wyckoff accumulation for Bitcoin. And basically where we were all the way up here, just losing that prior level at 69,000. I told you guys that as long as we lost 69,000, we were bearish until we got all the way back to at the minimum 64,000, but we have the potential of us even revisiting all the way back at this low end of support. And in the current market, we're at 60,000 right now, retesting this lower level, and this is really just following along with what I expected. Now the real question comes, is this going to be this final shakeout that we end up seeing right here on support, or what is this final fake out going to look like? Because I'm not going to be surprised if we ended up bouncing here, and maybe we even peaked below this last capitulation that we saw at 57K. I'm not going to be the least bit surprised to see anything like that because it's following your typical Wyckoff schematic. We knew that when we were up here, we needed to hold this breakout above 69,000. Otherwise, it was just going to be another rejection at resistance, and that's exactly what we saw. Once the market started to pull back up in here, once we actually broke back below support and started rejecting right here, that was when I made the update saying that we were most likely going to be bearish, at least to 64, potentially all the way back to the range lows. The truth of the matter is because of this extra FUD, we're seeing Bitcoin revisiting these range lows. And the question now comes, are we going to hold 60K and kind of chop around right here? Or, are we going to end up making one final sort of flush before that reversal sets in? And to be quite honest, I don't really know, nor do I care either scenario. I figured that we were going to see the correction up in here. Now that we've got it, we're approaching support. You're much better off looking for long entries on support than you are looking to sell. The time to sell was when we were rejecting up at resistance and we just successfully broke down from our support. Now, we've revisited this entire move, coming all the way back down to these range lows. And so now I think that we're much better off looking for a reversal point. It doesn't have to happen. Like I said, we could see the market bounce in here and still end up making a lower low from where we just bottomed at 57K. I'm not going to be surprised to see that because in a Wyckoff schematic, that's pretty, on par. If you guys notice here, we have a low, a second lower low, and then we have a third lower low. And it's that third lower low that gives us the spring-loaded bounce before we go back up again. We very easily could be at that same exact moment of time. Having such a big fundamental, sway in the markets, giving us this FUD event around the Mount Gox unlocks, it's the perfect type of catalyst that you're expecting to see whenever the market gets to that shifting point. Now, like I said, that shifting point can be a little bit lower than where we're at. We might come back down here, bounce, and make one final sort of capitulation below that range, kind of completing your normal sort of Wyckoff, just like what we did in here, before we end up reversing. I really don't care, but the big thing I want you guys to be aware of is the big picture still has never been stronger. And one of the big fundamental things that I think is going to drive a lot of value, regardless of Bitcoin sell-off right here, is really looking over here at Ethereum. Because when we're looking at Ethereum, Ethereum has now mostly retraced the entirety of that ETF pump. we're basically right here. So we've mostly retraced the entirety of that hype move. And this is what I talked about in my video when I said that Bitcoin could very easily revisit the low end of this support. And I said how if we did end up following this Wyckoff schematic and we did come back down to support, many altcoins could make lower lows. And Bitcoin in and of itself would just still be ranging within a 20% gap. And that's exactly what's happened. Bitcoin made this drop, but many altcoins got slaughtered. And with Ethereum, it's actually held up relatively better. And one of the things that I think could be a shifting point, these unlocks for Bitcoin are set to be sometime next month. Now, the Ethereum ETF is about to go live in like a week from now. So we're looking at also July being the beginning stage for the Ethereum ETF. I think that with all of this sort of hype that's died out, people selling off, people panic selling their Bitcoin around this news with the Mount Gox unlocks, I think that there's a lot of reason to believe that we could be at a shifting point inside of the greater picture market. Now, I told you guys that if Bitcoin revisited the low end of support around 60K, Ethereum was probably going to fully retrace this entire move. And that's mostly what we've done. In fact, Ethereum has actually held up a little bit better than Bitcoin. And so as it stands, even if we make a little bit more of a lower low, I'm not going to be surprised to see Ethereum actually start to reverse around these levels, even if it goes a little bit lower before we do that. When I'm looking at Ethereum, the main thing that we have to understand is the Bitcoin dominance. And Bitcoin dominance, even though that we're seeing this big sell-off in Bitcoin, we're seeing the Bitcoin dominance still actually pulling back. This thing is rejecting. We have two bearish pin hammer candles that have closed up here. We have the most bearish divergence that we've ever seen in this chart for a long time. We've had higher highs and higher lows maintained here, yet the RSI is just getting smashed every single time, with most recently being our last rejection right here. So when I'm looking at this, I do believe that we're at that shifting point, and we can come and look at ETH BTC and we can see a lot of the same similarities, right? We've been in this downtrend for over a year and a half. This is like 658 days total, which I'll remove this and then you'll be able to see it again. This entire sell-off is worth like 650 days of accumulation. If you guys notice, in my last update, when Ethereum first started breaking out, this was our first Elliott wave impulse of this new bull trend. Prior to this, it was just lower lows and lower highs all the way through, rejecting off this descending resistance every single time we've hit it. Now, most recently, we did the same thing and we still rejected below it. But if you guys notice, we successfully held our first true support and resistance flip. This was all resistance and support. We've successfully broken out, retested that horizontal level as new support, and the market is currently working on that same descending resistance. The difference is if the market is able to get outside of this resistance right here, ETH is in for a complete reversal because this is a one-wave impulse. We can come down here and look at Fibonacci, and this will give us an idea as far as our next target. We're looking at the 1618. So we're looking at this thing making another decent sized breakout very, very soon. From where we're at right now, about another 34, 35% up before this thing is actually done. And it could even come to the 2618, which if we come to the 2618, that's going to be all the way back up to these range highs being 0.08 per Bitcoin. So if we were to see something like that, which is completely normal inside of a three-wave impulse, it'd be closer to 60%. And what we're looking at down in here, this is a wave one, this was a wave two. We're getting ready for our wave 3 next. Our minimum target is 0.072 per Bitcoin, or the 1618. And oftentimes these three waves can even come all the way up to the 2618. So we don't know specifically where we're going to go. But if we came all the way back up to 0.0789, kind of in between the 2618 and the 1618, honestly, that would set us up for a very big move, and I still think that this thing is going to be going into a much bigger breakout very soon. Because of the fact Ethereum BTC is reversing right here, we have our first subwave, Elliott wave impulse that's happened, our first true support and resistance flip on the shorter time frames. We actually have a good amount of volume that came in with the ETF announcement. Everything we needed to see for a cycle perspective is played out, and because we're on the verge of this breakout, I look at the price of Bitcoin and I'm not going to be the least bit surprised to see this same Wyckoff schematic end up playing out once more. Wherever this bottom is, whether we chop around here for another couple months, it's to be expected. This is a pretty big shakeout. And so even if we dropped a little bit lower, if we get some type of capitulation event taking place around this Mount Gox announcement, I've got a lot of confidence that we'll probably just trend sideways for a couple months, a lot more of the same, just sideways, up and down, ranging, before we get that next breakout. A lot of it is going to revolve around what happens at this support, but because I'm seeing Ethereum holding up better than Bitcoin is, this thing is looking like it wants to break out against Bitcoin. And if Ethereum is going to be breaking out against Bitcoin, and we're looking at the and we're looking at the Bitcoin dominance at a significant topping point in its history, I think that we're at that shifting point in the cycle. And, maybe this really is the bottom for Bitcoin. Maybe this is that final sort of capitulation, that big shakeout that we were looking for. Get all the weak hands out of here, get everybody to capitulate. Oh man, next month, they're going to unlock $10 billion and everybody's going to market dump Bitcoin to zero. A lot of people are going to be thinking that, but oftentimes these Mount Gox announcements are already priced in. When we're looking at the data, like I explained, all the data shows is that there's actually a much smaller amount of Bitcoin, and really Bitcoin Cash is also going to be unlocked. So you're looking at a lot of that sell pressure being absorbed in Bitcoin Cash as well. So it's not only Bitcoin, and then when we're factoring in the total amount of Bitcoin that's actually going to be unlocked, it's a much smaller fraction than the total $9 billion or $10 billion that these different sort of groups are claiming to be unlocked. So when I'm looking at Bitcoin, I think that this very easily could be that final capitulation that we've been looking for. Whether it happens here, whether we go a little bit lower, truly I don't give a crap. It doesn't change anything. Now that we're approaching support, I think that we're a much better buying opportunity than we should be selling. Even if it only produces a short-term bounce, I would expect at least a short-term bounce if we ended up going lower. But regardless, we're going to watch and see how this plays out. The most encouraging sign for me is seeing this ETH BTC pair about to be breaking out, because once this breaks out, we're really looking at the entire shifting point for Bitcoin rotation to be going into the altcoins. We're looking at that big rotation coming in here very soon. I don't find it coincidental that all of our charts are showing up these signs. Bitcoin dominance showing a major topping point and exhaustion on the RSI. And then we're looking at, the ETH BTC pair finally about to be breaking out. I don't find it coincidental that the ETH ETF actually goes live at almost the exact same point that these unlocks for Bitcoin are taking place. So doesn't it make sense that this ends up being a fundamental driver for the altcoin season that we've talked a lot about? Because if we're now looking at Bitcoin having unlocks, even if it's only $2 billion or $2 billion that gets dumped, or $5 billion, the amount of inflows that we've had from the Bitcoin ETF is billions and billions of dollars every day. It literally doesn't matter, guys. Every single time I've seen a Bitcoin unlock for Mount Gox, it's always marked a short-term, fear event. People panic sell in the short term, but it's never amounted to anything. And I still lean towards that playing out once again. I'm still sticking to my guns. I still believe that we're at a topping point inside of the Bitcoin dominance. We're seeing more and more exhaustion taking place here. Now that we've kind of, revisited this support, we've had this big spill all the way back down to the range lows. Now is the opportunity for longs. I think that we're most likely at that shifting point and really seeing Ethereum BTC about to break out. Once this breaks out, I got a lot of confidence the alt season is very much underway. So guys, if you found value in this video, please do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Anybody that wants to see how I'm investing long-term, any altcoins we're buying, selling, trading in this dip, links are in the description to go ahead and check out my website. With that being said, I appreciate you guys. I love you, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video. Expect one tomorrow. With that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. As always, peace out.